Eric Brown of the Manchester Cricket, take it away.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hi.
Good.
Hey, it's great to talk to you guys. There's a lot going on. Thursdays are, these days especially, are pretty busy by the time I talk to you because I put out the paper, as you know, it's an early morning start. I get up at like 5. But the Board of Health has their weekly meetings now that's COVID specific at 8:30 in the morning. So I'm always fresh from that, which is really kind of relevant for a check-in on sort of all things COVID. Um, then we also had a very, very colorful meeting last night. It's a joint meeting. I don't know if you've heard about it with the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen in Essex about Canomo Point. Did you hear about that?
No.
A little bit. Yeah. Yeah. Do tell.
I mean, I could start with that if you like, because it was pretty wild. And I see that Mike Cronin from the Gloucester Times has already put a story out. He put one out last night because he was on the call. I haven't read it yet, so it's funny. I'm going to tell you what happened, and then I'm going to go and compare and see, and then we'll put up our story, a little later today. But it was quite a meeting because, yeah, they met last night. It was a meeting to, and it was, there's a regular Board of Selectmen meeting next week with regular business, all important stuff. But last night was specifically about Canomo Point and the question of whether to, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to pull it up just so I really am clear. They were going to limit reoccupancy of seasonal, sort of residents coming back to Canomo Point. That was really the question. And then the other question was whether or not they should limit Canomo Point access to just residents or not. And what made it sort of a meeting that brought out, like, I think there were like almost 50 people on the call last night. It was so many people that it wasn't a web conference. It was a conference call meeting. It was shut down actually because it got dropped because there were too many people on it, which tells you a lot. But the other thing they were going to do is, and what made it, I think, somewhat controversial or prompted people to get on, is one of the mechanisms for managing this was whether or not they were going to turn on the water on April 15th when they were going to. And if you want to get people to show up at a meeting, tell them that you're considering not turning on the water for the season on April 15th when you're supposed to. And instead, this was all going to be tied now to the governor's kind of state of emergency lifting and the lifting of social distancing restrictions. And this is exactly what happened. I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago. It happened in Manchester 2 weeks ago with Singing Beach, where there was a nice day and the police got spooked because lots of people came out. And one of the reasons why they all came out was because there's nowhere else to go because things were shutting down. Same thing happened last weekend. Paul Francis got on the line and said, listen, it was a really nice day. And everyone descended on Canomo Point, because it was beautiful and it's a beautiful place. It was a beautiful day, but also because there's nowhere else to go. And other places, neighboring towns have shut down their sort of public areas. And so they all came to Canomo Point, and Canomo Point is so densely packed anyway. So everyone got spooked. They got on the phone and they basically went through. Where they netted out, they're not going to shut off the water. They're not, or I shouldn't say it that way. They're not going to not turn on the water. Does that make sense? They are going to turn on the water for year-round residents who've been living with a cistern, with cistern subsistence. I'm sorry, you know what I'm saying. But they've been waiting and counting the days. But really, it was sort of some interesting moments. They restricted Canomo Point to Essex residents and people with a valid clammers license. So from Gloucester, people with clamming licenses can access. They've restricted parking everywhere starting on Canomo Point Road, all the way, and then including some of the parking areas at Canomo Point. There's only one area now where you can park, and that's on Clammers Beach. So there's 2 little parking areas there, and that's where it's going to be restricted to. So very colorful meeting. Really interesting, Bob Sisk, who is the head of the Canomo Point Association, he actually spoke, and he really was very articulate, and he kept on trying to extend this olive branch to the Board of Selectmen to say, and the Board of Health to say, listen, please let us do this voluntarily. Let's work together because we can mend our past, because there's a problem there. And in the end, he kind of got half of what he was looking for. Number one, the water will be turned on, but guess what? Those seasonal residents who have seasonal kind of occupancy permits, they have to wait until the governor of Massachusetts lifts the restrictions, and that's going to be into May. So this has implications for rent to the town, because if you restrict access. So anyway, I'll just say one last thing about the meeting. There was a moment, I mean, residents who like come into these calls, they don't understand mute, the concept of muting. so at one point, so Brendan Zabricki kept on saying, mute your phone, you know, but then people would keep on getting dropped and coming back and not understanding that they weren't muted. And you'd hear people saying, I'm on the phone, you know, and they'd be talking to each other. But at one point, and wait till you hear this, at one point, there was a resident, and I don't know who it was, and I don't know if this is in Mike Cronin's article, but one resident got so upset, she told the board to go F off on the call. And Brendan, to his credit, he said he ordered the Board of Selectmen to order everybody on the call to mute their phones because they don't have the control, but something tells me they'll get those controls of being able to centrally manage and mute their phones. But it was quite a moment in sort of the new world of virtual public meetings.
Public meetings never stop. They're becoming incredibly interesting, right? Let's put it that way. Yeah. I love public meetings. So can we just clarify? So at this point, Canova Point is only open to Essex residents and clammers, people with licenses to clam. Yes. Is that right?
I'm looking at my notes here. Yes. And by the way, a resident is somebody who pays taxes and has a resident sticker for the dump, and that includes Canova Point leaseholders, by the way. Okay. Who that was brought up last night, whether or not they're considered real residents because they don't live full-time and year-round in Essex, but they're considered residents.
So policing of this will be done by the police?
Yeah, and starting this morning, it's effective immediately. I went down this morning to get pictures because, you know, it's an early morning for me, and they hadn't quite done it yet, and that was at around 8:15. So I'll go back later today to get a picture for the story on the actual signs that say closed.
Okay, because you know in Rockport we have a residents only. Our beaches are open only to Rockport residents and Bearskin Neck, and there's been some hostility. You know, people policing, vigilantes, saying, you know, do you live in this town? Do you live in this town? Yeah. And it's created some pretty uncomfortable and unpleasant situations.
Yeah, I think that towns in general are sort of trying to find that balance between being vigilant, understanding what it means to social distance, and sometimes that's subjective, right? So you'll have people, I mean, on the Board of Health meeting, and now getting back to Manchester, Board of Health meeting this morning, there were questions about whether there should be on popular walking routes one way, because they've done that apparently in Beverly, you know, for just one street. And I think it was the one by Dane Street Beach, whatever that road is called. I'm forgetting it right now, but, and they ended up voting it down, but really it was a matter of saying, listen, and they made the judgment call. They said, you know what, people are being nice to each other and courteous to each other, but they're social distancing. They're being really compliant. So why don't we wait until we see a problem? And there seems to be this thing that's happening that I'm recognizing in different towns where it's really the point person for reporting whether something's a problem is the chief of police. So Todd Fitzgerald, if he's the one who said Singing Beach is a problem. We need to do something because it all comes down to the same thing. The public, when you get to a point where your public safety and your first responders are using their time and their resources to manage compliance, and I've said that before to you, that's when they say, listen, they raise a flag and they say, if we're compromised, you're in trouble later because we're not going to, you know, get ourselves involved with maybe making each other safe. And then now you see people policing themselves to some degree.
Right.
Yeah. Another big thing that happened today, Board of Health, is that in supermarkets, and I don't know if you're seeing this elsewhere, but now the new, you have to have occupancy, half of occupancy. So for Crosby's, their occupancy at any given time, including employees, can't be more than 104 people, apparently. So that means 52 people are allowed, including employees, at any given time. And that's as of yesterday. That's a state reg. So for us, that's Crosby's, but up in Gloucester, that's, all the, Market Basket, and et cetera, et cetera.
It makes you wonder if the markets and pharmacies will expand hours at some point to help with controlling that.
It's interesting. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah.
These are so vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's really a tough situation.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes because there were so many things, but.
Well, that's great stuff, Erica.
Yeah.
One thing that happened this week with the Board of Selectmen, by the way, in Manchester, they actually considered, because everyone's bumping off their town meetings, like Essex is now June 15th, and Manchester is sort of bumping in 30-day increments. Manchester actually considered this week and floated the idea of having an outdoor town meeting.
Hey, all right.
Wow. That's very cool.
Not a singing beach, though.
Yeah, yeah. So where would that be?
Listen, we're talking June, so hopefully that will be. We'll be kind of at Singing Beach again, maybe.
It'd be interesting that all these topics you talked about, how this is going to play out in the next 3 to 6 weeks. As things get warmer and people are dealing with, they're going to be a lot more extroverted, I think, and how they deal with things moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, and you just take it day by day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still fascinated. Where would that outdoor town meeting be? That Let's Go town meeting.
I don't know, but they're exploring it, and apparently it's not a town meeting concept where it would be like under a tent. It's kind of. It was a very interesting. It kind of was a left hook for me because, and I think anybody else who was on the at the meeting, they have not resolved it. They're going to work through it. I doubt they'll do it, but maybe they will. It'll be just very interesting. Apparently, and I haven't researched this, but apparently there's been a town that has done it successfully, and the way they did it was they actually rescheduled something within 3 days of its original date. And so they knew what the weather would be. So they were able to do it, boom, really fast. So I think that's part of it, but I don't know. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's how they did things 375 years ago.
Exactly.
Who would have thought that we'd be talking about this like 2 months ago, right? I mean, talk about left hooks. There's so many.
Yeah, exactly. One last thing that the Board of Selectmen and just, have started to really look at, and this is quite serious actually, and I like that they're on this so fast. They're being preemptive. Is they're really looking at the business impact of all of this, because they're knowing that once we are getting on the other side of the public health crisis, that there is a real issue. So the town is really exploring ways on how they can just support businesses. They're looking at a lot of different things, what things they can abate, how landlords might be helped versus the tenants, and looking at ways to help both. And then also the Affordable Housing Trust is starting a program that they're going to really try to put in place. And this is all going to hit next week at their meeting. And that's really to help with rent and to rent with abatements for people. So that's not the businesses, that's, people. Mm-hmm. And the Affordable Housing Trust. And I think they're going to look to Action Inc. As a model. And that could be really, really interesting. And I give them a lot of credit for anticipating where things are going and looking at things and starting to try to build blocks now. And so they spent the week looking at what their financial picture is for the town. Luckily, our picture, knock on whatever, is really good and solid. And so what that means is they can look long term and say, okay, what can we do? How long is this going to be? And what can we, they're starting the discussion, and that's a really good thing.
Good to know that the town is taking all these issues so seriously. And there's going to be a lot of concerns in the next 6 months to 12 months, right?
I think I'm more impressed every day at how these boards, particularly the boards of selectmen, how they're just showing up. These are volunteer people, right? And what they're doing, do you think that, Heather, you were saying 6 weeks ago, did we ever think we'd be here? guess what? 6 weeks ago, they didn't think they'd be here, and here they are, and they're kind of just finding their way through it, but they're doing it in a really admirable way. They're really rising to the occasion, at least from what I see.
Yeah, that is so good to hear.
Yeah,
There's a lot of good leadership around
it really is.
locally.
And they're volunteers.
Just volunteers, I know, and they are working so hard. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's end on that positive note, right?
Oh, that's a
And
nice
unless you have more, we good?
Yes. Yeah.
Great
Good to see
stories.
you guys.
We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.